Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of Jungle Smoke. My name is Felix Frog Bergeron, and I'm joined with my co-host Phoebe Dualism Dua. And on today's episode, we have a special guest, Vincent Vince Hill. How are you doing today, my friend Vince?
I'm doing well, thank you. I just got done casting, so I'm a little bit tired, but apart from that, I'm good. How about you guys?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. It's hot here, but I mean things are all right. What about you, Phoebe?
I suddenly remembered that because I am using desktop recording audio, I can't have push to talk on because it will make a bloop noise every time I try and talk, so you may just hear everything that's going on in my room for the next hour or so.
Lovely, lovely.
Professional.
Always, of course. So, Vince, yeah, if people who are tuning in don't know you, do you think you could give kind of an introduction as to who you are, what you do, uh, that sort of stuff?
Sure. I am a CS commentator. I'm also a streamer, and sometimes when I can be asked, I put stuff on YouTube. That's pretty much it. Mainly commentator, though.
Awesome. And so, yeah, linking to casting, I suppose, you just got done with Clutch Island, is that correct, right? The We Play
Yes.
CIS?
Yeah.
How was that? How did you find the experience? Was it good to kind of get back into the grind?
Yeah, I mean it was interesting because obviously it's all online and the production online is varying degrees. Some of it's really good, like when did the Blast Rising tournament not too long ago. That was incredibly well polished and much smoother than I was ever expecting. Today and the other 2 days has had a few hiccups here and there. I think this was kind of their trial run for the main event, to be honest, because this is kind of the qualifiers to the qualifier for the qualifier. It's really confusing for the major. So there were some hiccups, there were some issues for sure, but overall it was a good time. We had some really good games. First day was 4 best of 3, so I was absolutely wrecked after that, and I think I've just gradually been feeling it over the next 2 days. I think it caught up with me more today, but like mainly for my voice, like because when you're doing casting, especially play by play, and you've been doing a lot of it, it feels like you have razor blades in your throat. It's pretty rough, but it was a good time across the board, really.
Awesome. And I mean, how do you feel with the current online play? Do you think it's a valid setting right now? I mean, obviously, it's kind of impossible to host any lands at the moment, but do you think the level of competition that we're seeing is still pretty high?
That's an interesting question that I've asked myself a lot, because on the one hand, unfortunately, it's not like we can do any better. Like this is basically it for the foreseeable future, right? Until COVID's a thing of the past, and on which news outlet you look at or which research you look at, that could be a while. So for the time being, it's basically going to be online. In terms of the play, I think it's just very sporadic and inconsistent, and that's really what online brings to the table. Obviously, when players are at home and they have to rely on their own internet connection, their own PCs, their own networking, all that stuff, there's going to be a lot more technical problems. Finding servers that are reasonable for both teams going to be difficult, especially with multinational squads. So I don't think it's really like a fully indicative of the skill level in Counter Strike, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of teams break into like the top 10 that probably under normal circumstances wouldn't be. I can't say that guaranteed, obviously, but I would say like Big, for example, take nothing away from them, but they've kind of had this meteoric rise. I think they went up by like 16 points in the HLTV ratings, like 16 positions. Would that have happened online if online wasn't a thing and we're just doing LAN? I don't think so. Could be wrong. It's kind of a difficult one, honestly, Frog. Like I go back and forth on it quite a bit, but unfortunately, it's all that we really have right now. So we just kind of have to go with the flow.
It's not just the players that are online though. Obviously, the casting has been predominantly remote, even though We Play had a studio set up for hosting and analysis. Do you think that remote casting should become a more frequent feature even when lands return?
Um, Maybe. I think for smaller events it makes more sense because it costs the orgs much less. You don't have to fly out talent. Most talent will definitely charge more for obviously like studio time and being away from their family and being away from home than they would when you're online. It's very comfortable that I can basically roll out of bed and commentate and then just go about my day as I normally would. So that's definitely a bonus. Yeah, I think for lower tier events, it would make a lot of sense to have more remote casting. You see some tier one events do it now with the B streams. I've done quite a few B streams for like DreamHack Masters and these kinds of events. And it makes a lot of sense. But obviously, the downside for production, which I can understand, is it's quite a drop off in terms of production value. It doesn't quite have that same level of pizzazz as it would if you're actually at the event. But yeah, I think it makes sense for certain tournaments for sure.
And with Blast, what they did was they sent out backdrops and the same headsets and the lights so that their talent spread across various continents could have at least consistency and sort of a unified look. Do you think that's the sort of thing that would enable online broadcasts to look good?
That's definitely a possibility. I do wonder how much that costs Blast to send out headsets and, you know, send all of that around the globe, because I'm assuming that like Scrony and Lone is obviously in Canada, then you've got like Anders and Moses, America and Denmark, and a wide variety of other nationalities that'll be kind of getting those. I think Sponge and Maniac, etc. So I do wonder how much that would cost. Maybe it would still be less than flying people out in hotels and all that kind of stuff. But if companies are willing to take that expense and they think it's worth it, then sure, I don't really have an issue with that at all. It definitely could be something that is seen more in the future. I do think, though, for tier one events, I don't think much will change once COVID is a thing of the past. I think you'll see most tier one events, by and large, stay as they were before.
And speaking of everything being as it has been before, we are seeing a lot of events with the same talent. I think that there are maybe a dozen faces and names that most fans will expect to see at every single event. Considering the issues that you yourself are very outspoken about, whether it's payment, whether it's the politics, what is the big hurdle for whether it's established talent, that's not a word, established talent or newcomers trying to break into the scene?
Yeah, it is a tough one. I've been asked that a few times from kind of aspiring casters, is how do I get my foot in the door and what do I do once I've had some opportunities? And unfortunately, there is no simple answer to that. I think some of it is obviously your skill level definitely matters. If you are a poor caster, you're probably not going to get picked up to do events, or at least nothing that's going to be that good for exposure wise. But obviously, luck definitely plays a part in it. Grind, networking definitely plays a part in it as well. And my concern, and one of the reasons why I would never be somebody that took every single event offered to me, not just because I'd get burnt out quite fast and I like to be at home, I like my own space, etc., is there is definitely a thing, in my opinion, called viewer fatigue. I think if you have the same casters, analysts, broadcast talent on every single event, people will become sick of them because it won't feel like there's as much variety. People will get tired of the same voices, the same expressions, the same things. You're not supposed to listen to someone for that many hours. And I would always be very cognizant of that and careful that I didn't overexpose myself to an audience of just being at every single event, because eventually I'm under no illusions that I'm some like crazy sick caster. People will get sick of you. It's almost guaranteed. It's inevitable. Think of what happened to Semler. Henry's even getting it right now a lot. It's kind of like this balancing act. I understand why casters get worried about giving up potential work. At the same time, though, I do believe that if you just take every event and grind super, super hard for a very long period of time, it actually can damage you a little bit. And not just personally, which there's definitely that element to it as well, but I also mean brand-wise.
So do you think that having you and Dust been maybe, so to speak, left behind a little bit is kind of working to your advantage in the foreseeable future, in the sense that you'd be able to potentially cast more events and such like?
No, I think it's a balancing act, and we're on the other end of that spectrum where we're not getting enough. We're not working enough, and some of that is down to the fact that COVID is certainly taking a lot of the events off the table. The events that are there are mainly online, and so it's easier for people to take a lot of online work because there's no travel days involved. Like when the LAN events were overlapping each other, you'd have vast travel days, and certain talent couldn't be sort of doing one event after the other because might only be one day in between events. Now, if you're at home, no problem. You can just go from one event to the next, from one day to the next, no issues. So I think we're kind of in the opposite problem where we're trying to get involved in more events and more things, and it just doesn't feel like there's really that many doors are opening, more closing. But that's just part of the job, honestly. That's freelancing, whether you're a commentator, analyst, or just a freelancer doing whatever. There's going to be times where there is an element of uncertainty, and to be honest, it's terrifying because this is what you do to put a roof over your head,
Yeah, of course. I guess the uncertainty is pretty terrifying. And tell me a bit about Dust. What's it like working with him as you're doing? How did you guys meet? How did you guys get started in this? And what has stuck out, say, with Dust that makes you feel like you guys work really well together?
So I met Dust many years ago when we worked at a company called Civo. I don't know how much you guys remember it. It's kind of died off now.
Yeah.
But Civo, so Civo was like an online league, right? And they had LAN finals and all that kind of stuff. And I was doing the European portion and he was doing the NA portion. I think at one point I was put with Londers. There's another guy called Healy Umbrella and Dust, and there was some other people as well. And that's when I first met him. To be honest, the first time I met him, I didn't really vibe with him very well. We're very different people. We still are very different people, kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, to be honest. And so I thought the guy knows his shit. Like he understands. Sorry, are we allowed to swear? I just realized.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
If you want to call him a cunt, call him a cunt. That's fine.
Yeah.
He is in a way, but so am I. It's okay. But yeah, he obviously knew his shit. Like he's a very well versed, researched guy, but personality wise, we just didn't click at all. And so I thought nothing of it really. And it wasn't until later on where we ended up doing a LAN together. I can't for the life of me remember which one it was, what it was called. I think it was one of the Gfinity ones where we kind of clicked a little bit better. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something here. He's a very analytically minded person. I'm a play-by-play caster. Maybe if we can have set roles, we could be more like traditional casters because a lot of the other duos have gone into more entertainment focus. Maybe we can stand out from the crowd of being kind of traditional duo. And so it's just kind of built from there. It's kind of, honestly, on paper, if you'd asked me back in the Civo days, would I have seen myself being in a duo with him? I'd have said no, not because he wasn't good enough, but because of our personalities. Again, even to this day, we are very, very different people.
Now, one thing that is, I guess, I would say at this point infamous are some of the memes that have come off of appearances on No Majors Club. For both of you, you both have some interesting memes, I guess is the way to phrase it, involving fish heads and shit eating, which are honestly, if you don't know the backstory, it would be hard to go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's something that you said on stream that it can get pretty grating to have somebody thinking that they're very original coming in every single time saying, haha, the same joke you've heard 200 times. Do you think that having those jokes that aren't about your casting, aren't about your ability, but are, haha, it's a funny joke because it involves shit, is more of a help because people can connect with the thing that they know, or a hindrance because people almost don't pay attention to you and Dust, they're just thinking of the memes?
It's a very good question. I think it's a bit of both. On the one hand, I definitely see where you're coming from with the connecting to people, and especially if you take the memes well, it's an endearing kind of thing. I think I've always said to Dust, because I know Dust struggles a lot with memes, or at least he used to, and he took them to heart, and I said, look, you need to realize if you try and put up a shield and blockade against this, it's just going to make people even more have a more staunch outlook on trying to twist the knife a little bit and get a reaction out of you. So just go with the flow, like just accept it. And so that's kind of the way I've always been. The issue is, like, if you stream every day and it's something that's like particularly strange, like, you know, the whole scat thing, which literally came off a copy pasta because I have a rat emote. That's literally how it happened. And it gets spammed in like tier one tournament Twitch chats and spammed everywhere I pretty much go. It gets to a point where it's like, this is a little bit weird. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is a little bit off. And at that stage, after 2 or 3 years, it does get grating for sure. It's like, I've said this before, but if you had whatever your favorite meal is every single day, eventually you're going to get tired of it. And it's the same with a joke. Maybe at the start it was funny. After a while, it just kind of loses its charm.
Phoebe?
Oh, I thought you were going. I was just I was giving you space. It's fine.
Well, I was just going to ask then about streaming, as you touched on. You stream quite frequently. I mean, I know from personal experience, whenever I open Twitch, you're basically almost always there. Whether it's 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. here, doesn't really matter. You seem to always be streaming. Why is that? Do you just really enjoy it? And is it just because you think you really enjoy your community? What is it about streaming that kind of attracts you so much?
I think the thing that I enjoy most about streaming is that I started completely unknown on Twitch and I built up a community from scratch. I started streaming before I became even remotely known as a commentator. And so there's people in my community that I've had there for 6-7 years that were there when I had 5 viewers. And to me, it's a really cool kind of, maybe accomplishment's not the right word, but it's just cool to have that kind of longevity on Twitch. I'm not under any illusions I'm a big streamer at all, but to have the same people come back, to get to know a lot of people on a personal level, to really click and get to know what's going on in people's lives. And because I'm an older person and I've had a lot of experience in my life, I've had a lot of people reach out to me with questions or if they needed help or advice. And I think some people view me as almost like an elderly brother kind of figure. And that's a nice thing. I actually I really embrace that. I want to help people. And the interactivity of streaming to me is what's one of the most alluring aspects of it. I never want to be a huge streamer. I wouldn't want to have thousands of viewers because then it would lose some of its charm. In terms of any times of the day, it's just because my sleep schedules are always all over the place. I don't really sleep that much. And so streaming is also a good way of me just kind of turning my brain off to a degree and just kind of like focusing on the game or whatever, and not sort of external things. So yeah, I mean, streaming is something I really do enjoy, and I plan on doing it for a long time to come. Also, I mean, the other aspect of it, of course, is when the casting kind of dries up, streaming is a good secondary source of income.
I guess to continue on that, if you weren't a CS caster, where would you see yourself, say, in 5 years? I don't know if say Counter-Strike dies, would you want to cast another game? Would you want to not be a caster and become a streamer, as you say, or would you do something else entirely, maybe not even in esports?
I think if I had, like, if pipe dreams were fine and like acceptable in this, then being a full-time streamer would probably be what I'd look to do. But if not, then I would happily cast another game. I'm always looking for a possibility of doing so. The issue is, though, whenever a new game comes out that's attractive, every caster wants to do it. And so you get a lot of the tier 1 casters from other games will effectively move into that new game, and then they'll end up going back to CS or whatever, like League of Legends, whatever it is that they're doing. So if you look at Valorant, for example, I wanted to get into casting that, but I just don't know how to. That's the issue. Like, you can put your name forward, and I have to many companies. Oftentimes, you just will never hear anything back, and the talent announcement will be made, and you're like, well, didn't get it, on to the next thing. So I would, in theory, like to cast other games. I'm just not sure how to.
With that in mind, do you think that Valorant does have legs as an esports title?
Yeah, I think it does, and mainly because of Riot Games. They're going to push it hard. They're going to invest a lot of money, like they did for LCS. I remember being around because I used to cast League of Legends before the Challenger Series or any of that stuff happened. So actually a lot of their stuff was outsourced. They did a lot of DreamHack events for their like Challenger circuit. I think the same kind of thing is going to happen for Valorant. I think they're going to pump a lot of money in there. And whether the game is great or not is kind of irrelevant, unfortunately, in the grand scheme of things, because I think the money is going to somewhat carry it to having an esports scene. You're seeing a lot of players already move over because either they couldn't hack it in Counter-Strike or they burnt out in Counter-Strike, whatever the reason may be. So I think it does. I think it's going to be around for quite some time.
And something that we asked Dust on the last episode was that most of the players that have gone over from CSGO to Valorant have been North American. And most of them were players that, let's be honest, probably weren't coming back to top teams. They weren't going to be Liquid's next signing. But is there a risk that that sort of exodus of players could really damage North America now that we're seeing Liquid look okay but not great? Evil Geniuses, nothing to write home about. Cloud9, Thorin put out a video, I think, yesterday saying how Cloud9 aren't good enough. Have we kind of lost almost a generation of talent to Valorant?
Yes and no. I think in one case it feels like we probably have, because a lot of those players that probably wouldn't have made it, as you yourself mentioned, now we'll never know. On the other hand, though, I like to try and look at things optimistically if I can. And I think with that generation of players moving on, it now opens up more opportunities for the younger talent to come through in the NAC and show what they're capable of. Because especially at tier 2, tier 3 kind of competition, to be honest, it's quite an incestuous kind of scene. It's the same with UKCS. It's very stifling. And so if some of these players are no longer there to kind of gatekeep, as it were, I think you will see younger talent shine through now that ordinarily would not have got a chance. And they could be the next big thing. They could be the next Elige. They could be the next whoever. So on the one hand, yes, it does feel like it's pretty rough that a lot of these players are leaving. On the other hand, to be honest, they left for a reason. They probably weren't good enough to make it in Counter-Strike. Well, now there's more opportunities for people that are.
And why do you think that it's happening more in Counter-Strike in NA, rather than in Europe? Like, yeah, I guess we've seen, say, Fish123 and a few other maybe notable European players like Pith or perhaps even Drek and Mixwell recently signing for G2. But in the grand scheme of things, most CS players have stayed in CS when it comes to Europe. Why do you think that is?
I wonder if some of that's to do with optics, in the sense that because there aren't a huge amount of very, very big teams in NA that are necessarily competing at the very top level, like you have your Liquids, etc., but they're having their issues. Because of more players are leaving in NA, it's almost more of a shock to the system. Whereas, you just mentioned some European players. There'll be more for sure. I just don't think it makes the headlines as much. I don't think it's as much a knee-jerk reaction or it's as much of a shock. And maybe it's like a cultural thing. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. But I would say before, the end of the year, you're going to see a lot more players, both in NA, EU, and across the world, dip out and start to pursue Valorant if it is successful. If it lands flat on its face, then you'll see some of these players come back. But I think this is going to be something that you see more of. And I just hope that this is the real golden age for newer players to come through and to basically put their flag in the ground and say, look, I'm here, I'm good enough, and Counter-Strike is my passion. And you might see more orgs take a punt on newer people and younger players. I hope they do.
Well, I have some good news. In this hypothetical situation that I'm about to propose, you've won the lottery. And you now have a lot of money, and you can choose to invest in any of the FPS esports out there. You can pick CSGO or you could pick Valorant. If you had that choice and you had the power, if you wanted to buy any player, you have that opportunity. Which direction do you go in? Do you go for CSGO or would you invest in Valorant?
Mate, I just buy my own island. Fuck esports at that point. But seriously, which FPS would I invest in? I'm kind of going to give a bit of a cop-out answer because it really is a huge passion of mine, and I really do want to invest and increase the, I suppose, competition in Counter-Strike, but I would put it in CS. and I'd probably invest it mainly in a UK team, and I'd try and get the next sort of generation of UK players. UK has been starved of good talent for a while now in Counter-Strike, and some of it is because of what I mentioned before, where you had the old guard kind of gatekeeping, and a lot of the newer talent just didn't really get a chance. So I think you're seeing Endpoint in particular turning a lot of heads. Obviously, you've had your flashes in the pan, you've had your Smooyas, etc. Show that he's individually definitely skilled enough. But I think I'd probably invest it in Counter-Strike in the UK scene, and I'd try and find 5 players that work well together, that are hungry to achieve something, and I try and inject some money into that aspect, because it's sorely lacking right now, and it is a shame. Like, it is a meme for a good reason.
Obviously, you have Ninjas and Fedoras as your own open team. So, to a degree, I think it's acceptable to say that you enjoy playing Counter-Strike and you want to see it develop further. Do you think there's any players right now that stand out in the UK that haven't necessarily actually gotten the spotlight they deserve? Obviously, you spoke about Endpoint, but is there anybody else in your mind?
The problem is that not really. You've got the usual suspects that are out there. You've got your Crucials as well. Not Crucial, sorry, he's Dutch. But you've got players like Surreal and Depth and these kind of guys that have been around like the NA scene. But when you dip down below maybe 5 or 10 players, there really isn't many people out there. Endpoint have some real talent. Mighty Max, for me, is an exceptionally good player, a very good IGL, and from speaking to him, a very intelligent guy and a likable guy as well. So I really hope that he in particular can make a real go of things. But therein kind of lies the issue, and why I'd want to inject the money in is I don't think that anyone could rattle off 20 players from the UK that are of a very high caliber or well known. Maybe there are some great UK talent out there, I just haven't heard of them before. So for me, not really. Like, there are players for sure, but I couldn't give you some obscure UK team that I think, given a year or two, is going to be busting in like the top 50 or top 25 teams, honestly, as much as it saddens me to say that.
Considering the British players are often the scourge of EU matchmaking and have quite the reputation, why is it that you think that the UK doesn't produce many players? In fact, in any real esports, we don't really have any game other than maybe a FIFA that has particularly prominent UK talent.
Because honestly, we're cunts. Like, that sounds like a flippant statement, but it's also true. Like, we are absolute dickheads. Like, whenever I play matchmaking, there's memes about Russian players and French players, and I'm sure in NA you probably have like a certain subset of players that you can't stand, and if you know that somebody on your team, right, there you go. So it'd be like Floridians. So like if you have people like that on your team, you think, oh, for fuck's sake. Honestly, British people are that for me. Every time I hear someone open their mic and they're British, I think, well, here we go. I'm going to have some toxic bellend on my team that just flames and just rages and thinks he's the greatest gift to all mankind, I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's an arrogance thing, honestly. And this is why when I look at someone like Mighty Max, who's actually not toxic at all and doesn't really like shit talking or any of that stuff, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, and it gives me a little bit of hope for the UK scene. But I think the issue is more cultural based. Obviously, you have some of the issues that I talked about before, when the old guard were kind of basically regurgitating the same 7 or 8 players and no one else really got a chance. And back then, esports wasn't big enough to have enough supply and demand to allow 10, 20, 30 players to make a living off it. It was basically you were either in the top UK teams or you were just doing it as a kind of part-time hobby thing you did in the background when you had 1 or 2 full-time jobs. I've been there myself in other games, so I know how rough it is. So people would just inevitably have to drop out and do real life stuff instead. I think that definitely didn't help matters of building sort of a better foundation in terms of UKCS.
So do you think that for the players that are around, say, like Smooya and Alex, right, do you think the only option they really have is to go international, like we've seen Smooya with Big, Alex with Vitality, perhaps even Mezzy recently with Team Gamer Legion, right? Do you think that's the only way for them to go? To make a career?
I think it might be, yeah. I don't think that you could reasonably go in for a full UK team. I mean, even mentioning Endpoint, they're not full UK. They have Robin, who's Swedish. So, I mean, even in that case, it's not really possible, I think. There's not enough talent out there to go for it. So I think you do. I think you have to establish yourself, whether it's through FPL, whether it's through kind of working your way up from grassroots teams like tier 3, tier 2 teams, and then getting picked up by a different org, whether it be NA, whether it be a European org, a multinational org, like a phase in the future or whatever. I think that might be the best chance that a UKCS talent actually has to get to that next level. I think it's going to be quite a long time before we see a full UK roster do anything like tier 1 wise.
Despite the UK lacking real top tier presence, I would say that the highlight of UKCS was probably the Face It Major, because of the fact that it was obviously in London and we actually had UK players have legend spots somehow. Still not sure how that happened, but I'll take it. And obviously you were there yourself, Vince. You got to cast a major. Would you say that is the highlight of your career so far?
It was definitely up there at the time, especially. This is after I had to take like a step back from casting, so I never expected it. And I want to say a special thank you to James Bardolph. I'll never forget this. He reached out to me and said it would be really cool if you can make it down. You know, we really want to make this happen. You're going to get to cast a quarterfinal. It'll only be the one game, but you come down, cast a quarterfinal, so you get to cast a playoff match in a major. And obviously, I think any caster that tells you that they're not like mindset on casting a major is lying to you. It is the pinnacle of what we do, and obviously, I jumped at the opportunity to do it. It was a very kind of actually emotional experience for me. And the crowd was so kind and so nice and generous. The way it was set up, James wanted it to be a surprise, like a shock. So I actually, some people don't know this, I actually traveled down from Newcastle via train to London before casting. I didn't even stay there the night before because he didn't want anyone to see me checking at the hotel and kind of ruin the surprise. So I traveled the entire day, casted that game, stayed there the night, then went back to Newcastle again the next day. And it was an amazing experience. Definitely at that point was the pinnacle. The only thing that I think is beating it is when I casted at Katowice Major, because that was the whole thing from start to finish. But it's definitely always going to be a very special thing to me, especially on UK soil. Like, that was very, very special.
So now that you've casted majors, what's next for Vince? You know, what is it? More majors? What do you want to do in the foreseeable future as a caster? What are your next goals and achievements that you want?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Because I ask myself that very often. I never felt like, even though I casted majors, and I don't mean this to be ungrateful at all, because I'm so grateful for every chance that I've ever been given. A lot of the tier 1 stuff that I've casted has been because other people couldn't make it. I've never really felt like I was the first name on the sheet. You look at sort of a talent list, I would be in the top 3 names. I casted Katowice because Anders had the birth of his second child. I casted tier 1 finals with Henry because this is when Sadakist had his, let's say, his oopsie on stream. And so he wasn't casting those events with Henry. They asked me to fill in instead. I casted Odense in Denmark because Pansy got food poisoning just beforehand, so I flew out last minute. So for me, I think my goal is to feel like I'm one of the first names on the sheet and that I kind of belong there, you know, because I often get imposter syndrome. I say Katowice is probably the one time where I didn't really feel like I did, because even though I didn't perform anywhere near as well as I wanted to, I did feel like I did a good enough job to justify being there, and I felt like I proved myself to a lot of people watching that were kind of naysaying about me being there, like, why isn't Anders there? Why is this guy there instead? Not knowing that Anders, you know, obviously had very important family matters to attend to. So that was probably the first time where I felt like, okay, you know, I belong being here. And I think in the future, I'd just like to get to a point where I was working consistent tier 1 events and doing more majors. Like, I would love to cast a major final one day. That's probably like the bucket list thing. Cast a major final. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to a question, but yeah, cast a major final.
No, that was a valid answer, and I mean, something that I guess is a relevant follow-up is you touched on the fact that a lot of talent people get quote bored of, or they have that sort of burnout seeing the same faces and hearing the same voices. Is it ever a worry for you that you might get to that point where you're thinking, wow, I'm actually doing really well, I'm getting to do a whole load of events, but then the community kind of has that moment where instead of being their darling that they're happy to see the whole time, they start to go, oh, that Vince bloke, I'm sick of him. I swear I saw him last week at an event, and kind of having that change in mentality.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. The whole viewer fatigue thing, and I would, I wouldn't be able to physically do it. I would go crazy. I I am not naturally supposed to be a commentator. I firmly believe this. I had to work at it very hard. Naturally, I'm a very introverted, quiet person. I'm very relaxed. A lot of casters, I mean, I know that you've been to events, Dualism and Frog. Frog, have you been to many events as well?
I've been to Cologne, and that is about it.
You've also done DreamHack Montreal's. He's done DreamHack Montreal.
That's true, yeah.
Have you met talent before there, like casters or whatever?
No. I mean, I've briefly spoken to Scrawny, but that's about it.
Yeah, Scrawny's chill. I wouldn't imagine him having a massive ego, but a lot of talent have egos. They're very big personalities. And I don't even say that as a negative. It's kind of part and parcel of what you do. You're on camera, you're speaking in front of hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. You have to have a certain level of confidence and a certain level of arrogance to pull that off. I certainly do when it comes to CS. I feel like I know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, people will notice that from a mile off. They'll be able to sniff out that weakness from a mile away. And if you don't think you're serious or don't really know what you're talking about, why would the viewers? Like, they're going to pick that to shreds. That's going to be really, really obvious. But naturally, I'm not somebody likes to be the center of attention. I, in truth, don't do many podcasts. I don't really seek them out. I just kind of thought it would be a really interesting conversation with you two guys, and it has been, and I want to help you out. But normally I wouldn't go out of my way to go on podcasts and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I'm naturally supposed to be a commentator. And it's kind of like, what's the best way of explaining this? When it comes to doing events, I had to really train myself to come out of my shell and kind of create a bit of a persona. It's still me. It's just a more energetic version of myself. I repress my accent a little bit as well to try and be as clear as possible for the audience. And I think it's an issue that not many other casters really have, because a lot of them may be a more energetic version of themselves, but their natural self is already kind of that person. Am I making sense? I feel like maybe I'm talking on my ass here.
I would say that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from.
I think that there's a problem with the fact that, in theory, if you're somebody that has to or wants to be on camera, you want people to look at you. And I think that there is an interesting line between a healthy ego where you're believing in yourself and you think, yes, I'm good at what I do and I think I have something worth saying and doing, and then having that go to your head where you go, everything I say is absolutely the most important thing that's ever come out of my mouth. Everyone should listen to me. Everyone should do nothing else but listen to me. And I think that there probably is a line that many people don't see when it comes to that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I think the real trick is to go back to your original question about viewer fatigue, is that I was raised to be quite a grounded person, and I wouldn't realistically be able to handle doing a lot of events. I need my own space. I find events exhausting because it's a persona. It takes a lot of energy for me to go on camera, to be surrounded by very loud personalities and a lot of people that are very confident and very loud, to be honest as well. It takes it out of me. I would never be somebody that could grind 3 or 4 events a month. I think for me the maximum would be 2, and more than likely 1 would be enough. So if I could get by doing 1 or max 2 events, I don't think viewer fatigue would come in as much, and I think I'd be able to manage that. I have a lot of respect for people that can do every event that's thrown their way. Don't get me wrong here. Like that is a real respectful thing as far as I'm concerned. You must have a lot of mental and physical stamina to deal with that. I'm just not capable of doing it. And so I don't think I'd ever be in a position where people were like, Jesus Christ, it's that guy again. I've watched him like 6 times already this last couple of weeks. I'm sick of him. I don't think that would necessarily happen. Like, people won't like my casting. That's just inevitable. But I don't think it will be because I'm around too much and I'm overexposed.
To kind of touch on what you were saying earlier, about casting not necessarily being something you think is natural for you, what really attracted you to casting? What made you want to do it and pursue it as a...
So when I was younger, I always found commentary on sports. I watched a lot of football. When I was younger, I watched a lot of wrestling. There's a guy called Jim Ross who always blew me away with his narrative, and his lines would always stick in my head, and I always thought it added so much to it. I kind of stumbled into casting by accident. I used to play like the early CODs to a very high level. And my friend at the time was a commentator, and his partner couldn't make it. I think maybe his internet had gone or something like that. So I stepped in, and I thought, this is going to be awful, but I'll help him out. He needs my hand. And at that point, I was playing to a good level, and I was kind of known for being somebody that was quite analytically focused in games that I played. So I thought I'll be his color caster. So I actually started out as a color caster, and I really enjoyed it. Like, pretty much straight away, it clicked, and I thought, wow, this is really fun. I got some decent feedback from people, some terrible ones as well, of course, but I thought maybe there's something to this. And so it just became a hobby that I did over the duration of maybe 4 or 5 years, where I'd be brutally honest with myself. I'd record my casting. I still hate listening to my own voice to this day, but I'd be very honest and say, right, that didn't work, so we'll scrap that. That did work, so we'll keep that. And it just became something over a period of time that I really worked on. When I first started casting, it was in like a really thick Geordie accent as well, and I was like, that has to go. I'm very proud of where I'm from. I love where I'm from, but if you're casting the people that have 3 or 4 languages that they speak on a regular sort of daily basis, and English is pretty far down on their list, having somebody that's speaking really fast and in a thick accent not going to be particularly accessible. So I had to change that as well. And so it's just been like this gradual process. And casting was never something I thought I would love. It just kind of happened by accident, to be honest.
I think that's super interesting. It's kind of how I feel about this podcast, quite frankly. I'm not also very fond of my own voice. But wow, yeah, I mean, and to be fair, I think you've really achieved quite a lot with your career so far. I think you're one of the very notable members of the CS talent.
Thanks, man. It's been a lot of grinding, and I know that Frog, you come across as someone to me, because I have had obviously conversations with you, and for those of you who don't know, Frog's actually trialing to be in my team at the moment as the coach / IGL. So we actually have spoke a few times. You come across to me as somebody that is maybe a little bit on the shy side, and I say that as somebody that is myself. So again, not as a negative. If you end up getting a real passion for podcasting, you've just got to, as I said before, be brutally honest with yourself. Go back and listen, as painful as it is, and just make sure that you allow yourself the luxury of realizing what's good, and you make sure that you cut out the stuff that you don't like. And that will be a daily occurrence. That will be a grind. It will take a while. But if you have the passion for it and the drive for it, and this really could be advice to anyone that wants to do casting or whatever, eventually you'll get there, man. It's just about consistency, really.
I'm about to kill someone. They sent me a Steam notification, so that's going to be a noise right in the middle of that. Literally had a Discord notification. I thought, shit, let me just mute that, and then Steam's popped up. So I don't know how to edit that out. So sorry.
They're out to get you. They're out to get you, Dualism.
As I am also very, very professional, as I always say.
Of course, so popular.
But I will say, I feel like I speak for everyone who A, is in this call, and B, is listening, but I really hope one day for a show match where you cast in like a full Geordie accent and nobody has any idea what's being said.
That's the thing. I actually, in the We Play Clutch tournament for 2 best of 3s, I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to cast with my natural accent. And you know what? It was really hard because I've conditioned myself, even now, I'm repressing it. And so I've conditioned myself when public speaking in any way. It's the same on stream. If I'm tired, it'll pop out a little bit more. And obviously, there's certain words I'll say that'll still sound very northern. But it was almost like I had to learn how to cast again because I was so used to casting in my like casting voice. Um, it was really strange, and I thought it'd be pretty easy. I thought I'd just like naturally kind of flow into it. It was exhausting. It's really, really odd to me. Like I just do not understand that at all.
Frog, you there?
Oh, yeah.
You just
I,
hadn't said anything in a while, so I suddenly worried that you'd DC'd.
I've been killed by a moose out here in Canada. It's over for me.
Because I mean,
Um,
on the topic of accent, Frog, you are French Canadian, but I would say that you don't have a very typical French Canadian accent.
no, I don't. I would agree, and I hope everyone feels the same because, kind of as you were alluding to earlier, Vince, with whenever you come across a UK bloke in your matchmaking games, I feel the same way about French Canadians. I was raised by bilingual parents, so I learned both English and French at the same time. Hence, why I don't really have a very pronounced accent. I still obviously have a bit of an accent, but um, I just kind of I can't bear to hear my French Canadian accent. It just really gets to me, and I think um, it's kind of, as Vince was saying, not very appealing to the average listener, right? If you can't understand what I'm saying because I'm speaking like this and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce my words, and it kind of becomes really difficult to make content accessible, and also just to kind of interact with other people, I think. So I totally get what you were alluding to with your accent as well. Though I think you have a very nice voice, Vince.
Ugh, Northerners.
Thank you. The thing is though, one of the reasons why I wanted to try and do it with my natural accent was because I thought with things being a bit quiet right now, would one of the things that would stand me out from the crowd to go back to that accent because obviously Duncan Thorin is from the northeast, not that far from where I'm from, but he's more on the desk, more content. Richard also he lived in the northeast for a while, also lived in Wales for a while, so he has elements of that, but he's not doing events right now, and even if he were, it probably would be as a host, not as a commentator. And so I thought, would that maybe be something that separates me from the crowd? So have been thinking about maybe reverting back to a degree, but then it's about again finding that balance. It's like, how do I do it in a way that's still accessible to people, but differs me from other people without going too far in the opposite direction? And everyone's like, sorry, what's he saying? Do you know what I mean? Like that for me is the difficult part to it if I were to go back.
I mean, people can understand the Swedish casters, and half the time you don't know what they're saying.
Shots fired.
Pew pew pew.
Well, I have a question for both of you.
Sure.
Go on.
And be as brutally honest as you want, because that's it's kind of one of my main things is honesty is always the best policy. So we did talk about Dust and I as a duo. What do you guys reckon, first off, is our biggest weakness as a duo? And secondly, what do you think is the ceiling that we can reach within commentating and broadcasting as a duo? Because it's quite difficult to be objective about these things while you're in a duo, because a lot of things will come across as you're kind of in the moment. And even when you go back and listen to it, it's hard to separate yourself from what's going on. So it's often good to get other people's opinions. And I get the impression, first off, you guys know what you're talking about. And secondly, you're honest. So by all means, shoot.
Maybe do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm just shocked that I managed to trick somebody into thinking I know what I'm talking about. That's quite impressive.
You
I know,
do,
right?
just self-deprecating.
Well, no, I'd never do that. I think I'm a god.
To Elysium.
I think I put it into one of your discords. Can't remember which. I think it was Dust's. And I think I mentioned it to you as well, where I think it's that it's hard when everything's online, because I think that's the Blast Rising and Clutch Island being the most recent were online, so it's hard to tell what is it's Discord being funny and people lagging and doing all of that. But I guess it's like it's the general energy is good, but then occasionally there are moments where it's like you might have like a really great moment where you sound super hype and it's amazing, and then you'll just get Dust coming in going, yeah. Because he's clearly not listened because he's thinking about what he wants to say next, which is like fair enough, he's also got to have a few words in there, but I guess it's like keeping that same energy sometimes just doesn't happen because it's like hype and then nothing. There's no sort of come down from it that kind of goes between the both of you, if that makes sense.
I see. Yeah, I think that's fair, honestly. Should I listen to both bits of feedback and then answer, or do it individually? What do you think's best?
I can give my feedback if
Go
that
on. Yeah,
helps.
sure.
To kind of second that, I think, working on synergies is obviously very important, and I suppose kind of hard to do when you don't get many opportunities, which to me is probably the root of all the issues, right? I suppose if you guys really wanted to, you could, basically do the equivalent of a scrim, right? You're just open whatever ESCA MDL match is going on and just practice cast between the two of you to kind of build up that synergy if it's a time that's rough. I don't know. I'm just spitballing stupid ideas here, but I think kind of working together is kind of necessary because, as you've, I believe, alluded to earlier, Dust is a very smart analytical guy. He has he has a very good understanding of the game and a lot of depth to what he tries to say, but I think he personally struggles with kind of conveying that in an interesting fashion, kind of like, people might compare him to Yanko back in the day type of thing, right? And I think when it comes to you individually, I'm honestly, I'm not quite sure. I feel like you do a lot of the things right. Like you hype things up that need to be hyped up. The pacing is usually really good. I don't know if it's maybe a matter of implementing maybe a bit more chit chat just to kind of balance it out. If viewers aren't used to you yet, if it means that they need to have more casual, something that they can kind of relate to, and then slowly introduce the analytical stuff and build it up as you go. I don't know. I guess I don't really have a fantastic answer for you. I'm sorry, but
No, I don't think that any of that is dishonest or wrong. I think a lot of what you just said is definitely reasonable, and same with dualism. One of the other reasons I was so curious to hear your feedback was because I obviously have my own opinions, and I was curious if you would kind of mention things that I also think. So I think our biggest issue as a duo is lack of charisma. Neither of us are super big personalities. Neither of us are super enthusiastic people naturally. And so the hype stuff, sure, I can do that, but it's more the camera presence. It's more, as you said, Frog, I think this is completely fair. There's not as much banter. There's not as much chatting. There's not as much of that stuff. And some of that is intentional because I think, unfortunately, a lot of duos now have become a comedy act and everything is about them and cracking jokes and look how cool I am and love me, please. And it takes a bit of the shine away from the actual stuff going on. In my opinion, the players are the stars, not the casters. And some of that is intentional. But also, when you have a slow-paced game, when you have a game where absolutely nothing is happening, absolutely sometimes I should be chatting more, making wisecracks or whatever. Not enough to detract from the game, but enough to make it exciting and interesting for people. And I think I sorely lack that, and I think Dust does as well. But additionally, yeah, I think what you said as well, dualism definitely has a lot of merit. That the energy levels are sometimes a little bit off. I'll also accept some responsibility for that because I find online especially, it's hard for me to keep a lot of energy over a long period of time because I really feed off the crowd at LANs. For me, that is the most rewarding and great part about being at an event. And you guys have both been to events, you know what I'm talking about, that raw, that vibe, that energy, that just atmosphere that you get being at a LAN and hearing the crowd scream and roar for a good play. That just gives me so much life. And it's kind of hard, and this is, I suppose, to go back to one of the earlier questions about online casting. I think this is an element that online casting sorely lacks. And unfortunately, it's kind of hard to fake it. And I don't think it should be faked. I'm a firm believer in sort of genuine casting and saying what you actually think. And that's kind of, I suppose, my style to a degree.
I think I'll ask you a question in response to it, where Dust obviously also does analysis work, and what we've seen quite a lot of the newer casters on the scene do is switch between doing some analysis, doing some casting. Even their duos aren't set, and I think it's like Hawker and Dinko are my favourite example of that, where they will often be doing events completely separately. Sometimes Dinko is practically hosting, and Hawker might be doing analysis, or they might be casting with other casters who are around. And I think is it still a matter of you need a solid duo partner in order to rise to the top, or is being flexible something that's just taking advantage of opportunity rather than better for you as like an individual?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I'm in a good position to answer that because, truth be told, I've been on both sides of that coin. For the longest time, I was a solo caster that was just fit with people. If you think back to the old DreamHack Opens, I already kind of touched on it a lot with a lot of the tier 1 stuff I've done. I was put with Moses or Henry or other casters, and it was always a great experience. They're all phenomenal at what they do. But I think where I sorely lacked is not establishing a duo earlier. I tried, it just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. A lot of them were just unlucky. So at one point, when I casted my first tier 1 event, which is DreamHack Masters Malmo back in, was it 2016, the very first Masters event? I was working with Moses, and at one point we were thinking of making it a duo. We were both interested, and that was kind of our first event together where we felt it went pretty well. And then E-League came around, and he obviously, of course, he took that job, and that kind of killed any potential for the duo. Then obviously Samla and Anders stopped casting together, and it made sense that Moses would go with Anders. It's, in my opinion, an absolutely sick duo. I think it's actually the best duo in Counter-Strike right now, as far as I'm concerned. So there've been moments that I've kind of flirted with being in set duos and then been on my own. I think now, for you to make it to the very top level, you need a duo partner. To get work lower than that, tier 2, tier 3, you can be flexible. But if you want to break into the very top, most organizers hire in pairs because it's a known quantity. Most of them have a big backing and a big sort of following or fandom, I suppose, to a degree. And so, if you hire Moses, you hire Anders now, they do stuff individually as well. But typically for big events, they're going to work together. Now it seems like Machine and Henry are going to be a set duo as well. So I think for tier 1 stuff, you do need a set duo. Otherwise, you can kind of play the field a little bit more and just get slotted in where you need to be.
I also wanted to maybe add, kind of based on what you were saying earlier, I think you're a very interesting guy, and you kind of alluded to, living in Finland, for example. I think maybe that's something you could also perhaps implement in your casting. If it's just an ego round, like a full ego on the T side, they've only got Glocks. Yeah, fair enough. If it's FaZe Clan, anything can happen, right? But most of the time, those rounds are throwaway rounds. Maybe it's worth just kind of being a bit more personable at times like that to kind of, get the crowd to know you a bit better and connect with them a bit more and perhaps become a bit more of a fan favorite.
I see where you're coming from, and I actually do agree. The problem is, and this is the reason I don't do many podcasts and I won't actively go out there and seek attention, is I don't really like talking about myself that much. I will do it on stream and things. It's typically to try and help other people. So, for example, I've gone through weight loss. I've dealt with a lot of things in my time, and it's mainly to try and help others understand and to try and give them advice. So if I'm on cast, you'll probably notice this when I'm casting. Instead, and I've actually done it today when I've kind of turned it around and asked you guys questions as well, is I do like to hear other people's perspectives more so than talk about myself. I've always been that way. And so if I'm casting with somebody, I'll ask them a question rather than talk about me. You'll hear this a lot with Dust. And Dust could talk for days. So if there's a particularly slow partner around, I know I can ask him a question and he'll he'll kind of rattle off a lot of points over like a 2 minute period. And he'll fill in that blank time, no problems. But it is something that I struggle a little bit with when it comes to connecting with people. I think, Frog, what you said is absolutely spot on. I just don't know if I'm comfortable to do it. And also, I just think, who cares? Do you know what I mean? Like, that would creep into my mind.
I know that there is something that a lot of, especially your community, would really like to see, which is your feet. And have you ever considered,
I was wondering where that was going.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, but the community, they have their Pepes, they have their signs, they are saying show feet.
Jesus. So are you asking me if I'm going to show them?
I'm just saying, if you really wanted to spice up a broadcast, you just,
Make it a segment. Technical pause? No problem. Vince has got you covered.
Mate, hell would have to be over before I did that. And mainly just to save you guys the most gruesome sight you've seen. My feet are fucked. I have dislocated, fractured, and broken my toes so many times over the duration of my life with sports and other things that they're all pointing in different directions, mate. It's unreal. I don't even want to look at them, let alone take a picture and send them to you guys. Jesus Christ.
Damn it, but that was the whole point of inviting you on here.
I'm sorry. There's some things that are better left unseen, trust me.
That is so sad.
I actually have another question for you guys, if you're down to answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so by the way, if this is going over time, whatever, just tell me to shut up and we'll all be good. But
should be good for
what is the plan for you guys going forward? So you started this podcast. I know dualism that you do writing and you're somebody that definitely is interested in journalism. Frog, I know that you're interested in maybe getting involved in esports, whether it be coaching or otherwise. Is this podcast something that you guys think you're going to do sort of long term, or is it just a case of you trying your hand at it to see how it goes, and if it works, great, and if not, well, whatever?
Frog, you go first.
Okay. Well, considering, I'm not super established in esports. I like to follow it. I've been following it for a few years now, Counter-Strike specifically, but I like to branch out a little bit, see what's on the other side of the fence, so to speak. I think this podcast it's a first experience for me. It's definitely a learning process. It kind of, when you were talking about, your first casts and stuff like that, I kind of could relate to that with this podcast here. I'm trying stuff out and I'm seeing how it goes. I'd like to have a career in esports. I'm not 100% sure what that means yet. When it comes down to it, I've always just loved Counter-Strike as a game, and I've then discovered the community around it, and I've fallen in love with that as well. It's allowed me to grow as a person and to develop a lot of different interests. So to sort of answer, I don't know what I'm kind of want to do yet. Perhaps at some point it would be analysis work if that becomes something I think I'm good at, or perhaps it's just becoming a coach. If that's something I can do as well. I'm not quite sure. It's something I guess this is why I'm dabbling in it, and I'm just trying to figure out what it is that interests me and pinpoint more particularly, and maybe meet some people that can give me some of their experience in hindsight, and I can maybe apply that to what I'm doing.
Okay, yeah, makes a lot of sense.
For me, how do I phrase this without firing all of the shots? Esports writing, there's a reason that people don't stay in it, and there's a reason that there are very few good writers. It's a whole load of fucking bullshit. So I just am trying to do things that are interesting to me, and I think have interest beyond me, so that I have options when I either move on willingly or otherwise, to put it mildly.
Okay, so would you say it's fair to say that if this podcast took off and the two of you became, one of the biggest podcasts out there in Counter-Strike, or maybe even esports, that you'd want to use this as almost like a stepping stone to the next thing in esports? So, for example, you kind of touched on it there, Frog. If this was a way for you to get into some CS analysis gigs as broadcast talent or as like a coach or something, and dualism, if this was your way to become sort of content creator, or like, do you have any aspirations, for example, to get into the broadcast talent side of things? Like, if you could be an analyst or a host or just a personality?
I think this is very much. I mean, we can only hope that this is a runway. I think that's you don't want to make things for no reason, I guess. So I I personally would just like to be able to do something that's stable, and I think that everyone wants that realistically. But writing freelance is not stable unless you're somebody who can command huge rates for pieces and such. So it's just kind of like there's a lot of there's a lot of lack of personality, which doesn't make sense as a sentence, but I guess it's hard to show your personality without putting yourself out there in one way or another, and I think that that's what this kind of is for me. I'm not sure how Old Frog feels about it.
I mean, I suppose I'd be open to eventually doing broadcast work and stuff like that. I mean, not to flex or anything, but I was an actor as a kid. So I mean,
How many
I'm
films were
open
you
to
in?
doing
How many films were you in?
one film and one commercial.
Uh,
Yeah, there you go. Google me. No, I'm kidding. Don't, please don't. But I mean, realistically, I would potentially enjoy doing that. I don't know everything about the internal politics of how casting works and stuff like that. But it's definitely something that seems interesting. Desk work and working with teams as well. In an ideal world, I commit myself to the game to a point where I can become pretty good individually, and I want to IGL probably at some point, but I'd also I have a lot of respect for a lot of players. Say Kerrigan, for example, is one of my favorite players because I think he's super intelligent, both in and outside of the game. And if I was able to kind of play under somebody like that, I'd want to gain as much information as I could and just kind of soak it all in. And then whether I become an IGL for my own team or whether I coach a team and try to spread that and develop new talent, I suppose is what I would ideally want to do. And then play as many events as you could if you were on a team or coaching. So yeah, for me it's just a matter of trying to identify what I want to do and then perhaps use it as a runway to pursue that.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, I mean, that would suggest that the podcast is, as you both have kind of said, like a runway. And if it turns into something big, then awesome. And if not, then you had a bit of fun. You can get a bunch of different sort of guests and pick their brains. You mentioned like the politics in esports. What is it that you like from an outsider's viewpoint? Because I'm kind of curious on this because I see a lot of people like in Twitch chat or on Twitter, whatever, having their own 2 cents, and invariably it's completely wrong from somebody that's been in esports a long time. But what is your kind of take on how the politics in esports works? I'm really curious as people that aren't getting hired as broadcast talent, kind of what your thoughts on it are.
I guess, I mean, Phoebe probably has more insight than I do just because she's better connected. But, I mean, yeah. But I think the internal politics are... I mean, there's definitely a reason we see the same, 4 or 5 casters and analysts and stuff at the same companies. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing, right? If I'm ESL, I'd like to know that I can, if I'm hosting an event, I know who I'm calling because I'm happy to have these people work for me. We have a good working relationship, and they're reliable. I know what I'm getting, and hopefully they kind of feel the same way. But I think it kind of sucks that a lot of upcoming talent in the casting and talent world doesn't really get any opportunities because of that, and I think that's kind of unfortunate. With smaller TOs, kind of like We Play, for example, or even Winners League is another one that I've been pretty impressed with recently. I think we do get to see kind of more opportunities for these people. Uh, but yeah, I mean, we obviously don't get a full scope of what's going on behind the scenes, and there's probably some shady stuff that is better left, you know, not spoken about. But I feel like it's also probably very enjoyable for viewers to kind of get a better idea of what the scene as a whole is. So if that was more accessible, then I think that's probably for the better. Phoebe.
I mean, I'm trying to say this without being controversial, but then again, meh. The problem is that all areas of esports are bullshit the minute that you go below the surface level because of the fact that there are people involved. People will always find ways to make everything else not how it appears. Where it's like, yes, in an ideal world, say you're a talented CSGO player, you should be able to go and you play on a small team and then you work your way up and you make it to a big team. Doesn't always happen. Same for casting. You want to be able to believe that the best casters will do the biggest events, but there's politics there at every level. Same for writing as well. No surprises that there are people that will just do the kind of how to watch ESL 1 Cologne and do that 7 times and will get paid more than anybody doing like quality content. I think that it's a sad reality that a lot of it is murky, and I don't really think it can be quote quote fixed. And that's like it makes me very what's the word? Skeptical about the belief that it can just change quite quickly and that things will change it.
I would say because I've been in esports now for 10, 15 years, things have improved in a lot of different ways, but in some ways they're just the same. And the thing with politicking is it's not an esports exclusive thing. Politicking happens in every aspect of life to varying degrees, but there always is to some degree politicking involved in a day-to-day basis. Whether you're in a sports team or even within like a friend group, there's always going to be dynamics that require politicking. And the problem with esports is that it's not necessarily. This will sound kind of salty, but I really don't mean it to be that way because I don't think that I'm like the top caster or anything like that. But often it isn't necessarily how good you are to And if you already have a good working relationship with a company or with people and you get along with them well on a personal level, it increases the chances that you'll get hired drastically. The other issue on that, though, the other side of the coin, is that assessing how good a caster is very difficult because it's not like in HLTV where you have a top 10 ranking system and, you know, X team has won this many tournaments, therefore they're first. With casting, there's nothing like that. You don't have that. You're either deemed to be good from the majority of viewers or you're not. And so it's hard to know where you sit compared to everyone else. Like this is definitely an issue that a lot of casters, and I fell into this as well. You know, like how do I rate myself compared to other commentators? It's a hard thing to do. So when it comes to not getting hired, sometimes it's hard to know, am I really just not good enough? And it's hard to know, or have I just not networked good enough? And that can be a very demoralizing, disenchanting feeling when things are going poorly for you. And it definitely can be pretty depressing. I'm not going to lie. I think that's maybe one of the biggest issues I have with esports. Is sometimes it doesn't feel as if you're in the position that maybe you should be, but then there's that sort of other aspect where you think, or maybe I just have an unrealistic expectation of how good I actually am or how bad I actually am, and that's kind of where I am right now. Honestly, it's a strange bridge to cross, you know.
Well, I think that I think the good thing is that you have, from your streaming and from your casting, you have a community where I think that, yes, while they are degenerates, they are also very honest with you, and I think that that probably has its benefits, where you know that if they say that when you're casting it's good, you can trust them, because if they thought it was bad, they would probably say it straight to you without any shame.
And they have, and I really do appreciate the honesty. That's why, when I asked you about your feedback, I really did mean, be as brutally honest, and if it's shit, then just tell me type thing, because I can take that. Sometimes I think, though, that even though my community are degenerates and I love them for it, sometimes they are too nice, and I think that they mean really well, like they want to see me succeed, and so there might be a bit of bias there. Of course, there's people in the community that will just tell me straight up that was shit, in which case, fair enough. But it's one of those situations where, especially when I'm duoing with Dust, I am under no illusions that some of my community don't like him. They're not a fan of his casting. They're not a fan of him on a personal level, but they'll still support the duo because I'm in it, because they follow my stream and they've been a member of my community for many years. And so it's kind of hard to make that distinction. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to know which part of that is because they're following me and how much of that is because they're following the duo.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's kind of hard to make a distinction between the two. Call me an optimist, but I think that inevitably people who are good at what they do will succeed, right? Everyone has ups and downs. There's no hiding that, but I feel like, if you're a good caster, eventually you're going to end up where you're supposed to end up, right? It's not to sound like, it's not to sound, very feng shui or anything, right? But like, but it's also going to require a lot of work from the caster themselves. And I think you guys are definitely on your way. And I mean, I feel like if you guys weren't passionate about what you were doing, you would have jumped ship already, right? Like, there's, if you just wanted to make money, you could be a lawyer, right? There's other things. So if you guys are doing casting, I feel like, it's because you genuinely enjoy it. You genuinely have a passion and a talent for it, because you're still here, you're still doing events. I think it's just a matter of time, and being open to criticism as you have been, and improving. And I think you have the perfect attitude for that, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I want to do is sound like I'm like, woe is me, pity or sympathy or anything like that. The fact is, I've been incredibly lucky with the fact that I've been able to do this for the past few years full time. I've had a slew of shitty jobs, some of them very dangerous jobs. And so being sat here and having the luxury of doing what I do and making money from something that I absolutely love. I'm from a very poor place in the UK. My dad and mum, very working class background, sorry. So the fact I get to do this instead of breaking my back doing, manual labor or whatever is amazing to me. So I really don't want it to come across like I'm whining or anything like that, because nothing could be further from the truth. If my career were to end now, let's say that I'd never get hired again, never do an event again, I'd still be so grateful for what I had the opportunity to do. I got to cast at majors. I got to cast at Tier 1 finals. I got to live off this. I got to meet some great people. I got to meet some not so great people, but a lot of experiences along the way. So I'm very, very grateful for where I've been. If this is the end of the road, so be it. I hope it's not, but I guess only time's going to tell.
I think it's fair to say that we all hope it isn't the end of the road, and not to sound too much like a Dust tweet, people really do need to hire you two, because it is it's an injustice at this point. It's an injustice.
I agree. I will not stand for this any longer. I will tweet to all 15 of my followers.
But I think wait, how long have we've been going a while, so I think we'll wrap it up so that there's so it's slightly under an hour, because I will have to edit out the well, no, you don't need to know what I need to edit out, but that's fine. Vince, do you want to just shout out your socials and all of that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna hit me up, I don't really tweet about much other than Newcastle being dog shit and streaming now and again. On Fire Vince on Twitter, Vince on Twitch. And yeah, thank you very much, guys, for having me, and best of luck going forward with the podcast. Hope it's successful for you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.